The wedding should have been a celebration, a time for joy, for family, for unity. But the moment my mother cornered me in the foyer of her immaculate Virginia mansion, all I felt was the sharp sting of dismissal. She pressed a stiff, starched apron into my hands, the kind a caterer or maid might wear, and whispered, her voice laced with venom wrapped in silk. "You're not family, Claire, you're a guest worker. Now make yourself useful." Her words hit harder than the recoil of a rifle. She thought she was putting me in my place, reminding me that I was the daughter who didn't belong. What she didn't realize was that the woman standing before her wasn't a wayward child or some burden to be hidden from polite society. I was Colonel Claire Morgan, U.S. Army, retired. I had commanded troops in 2 combat zones, carried soldiers out of burning Humvees, and earned medals she had never bothered to ask about. And yet here, in her gilded world of charity luncheons and designer gowns, I was still the servant, still the inconvenience. I should have laughed. I should have thrown that apron back in her face. Instead, I froze, staring at the fabric in my hands. It wasn't anger that settled in my chest, it was something colder, heavier. The same feeling I'd known standing in the dust of Afghanistan after losing one of my men. A hollow space opening inside me. The house smelled of lemon polish and old money, exactly as I remembered it. Marble floors gleamed beneath my boots, and crystal chandeliers scattered fractured light across the walls. But there was something missing. My photograph, the one from my West Point graduation where I stood in dress whites, eyes alight with pride, was gone. In its place hung a towering portrait of my mother and younger brother. She wore silk. He wore a tuxedo. Their smiles were radiant, effortless, rehearsed. I had been erased. "Your room is upstairs next to the storage closet," my mother called casually over her shoulder, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the wedding planner hovering nearby. "You'll have to get your own towels." Then she turned back to a discussion about floral arrangements, dismissing me like a delivery person who had overstayed their welcome. I stood there, rooted in the marble foyer, the apron clutched in my fist. I had faced down insurgents with AK-47s. I had walked into villages where every alley might hide an IED. Yet standing in the house I once called home, I felt more invisible, more unwanted than I ever had in a war zone. That evening the humiliation continued. The mansion filled with the low hum of Washington's elite, politicians, lobbyists, business titans. Men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns floated through the rooms, sipping expensive wine, trading influence like currency. I moved among them quietly, searching for a neutral conversation, some common ground. Instead, I was met with puzzled stares, forced smiles, and the unshakable feeling that I was an anthropologist studying a tribe to which I no longer belonged. Then my mother struck again. She appeared at my side, a glass of Chardonnay in one hand, her smile polished to a weapon. She slipped the white apron back into my hand, her voice sugar-sweet yet cutting enough to draw blood. "Claire, darling, you don't know most of these people. Why don't you help the staff with the hors d'oeuvres? You've always been good at serving." The words weren't just spoken to me, they were broadcast, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. A few stifled chuckles rippled through the air. My brother Liam glanced over from across the room, his expression a blend of boredom and mild annoyance. He shrugged, turned back to his senator friend, and said nothing. Heat crawled up my neck, flushing my face. For a moment, I wasn't Colonel Morgan, combat veteran, recipient of the Bronze Star. I was just the helper, the extra, the mistake. The coup de grace came minutes later. A kind-eyed woman asked politely what I did for a living. Before I could answer, my mother slipped an arm around my shoulder, her touch possessive, her voice ringing with false pride. "Oh, Claire has some sort of administrative job with the government. Very stable but a little dull." Administrative. As if leading soldiers through firefights, drafting intelligence briefs that influenced national policy, and carrying the weight of command was nothing more than pushing paper in some gray cubicle. My mother's words weren't careless, they were calculated. A deliberate erasure of everything I had bled for. The laughter, the music, the polished conversations carried on. I excused myself and walked into the quiet of the kitchen. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I untied the strings of the apron, held it in my hands for a long moment, then let it fall into the trash can. The sound it made, barely more than a whisper, felt louder than the chatter of the party I had left behind. It wasn't an act of rebellion. It wasn't even anger. It was a declaration. That night, lying awake in the small guest room beside the storage closet, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the scene over and over. The apron, the portrait on the wall, the words administrative job, and the question that had haunted me for decades echoed again in the darkness. Why, Mom? Why do you despise what I've become? I knew the answer wasn't in that house. The truth, if I ever wanted it, would lie somewhere else. Somewhere older, deeper, sacred, and before dawn broke, I already knew where I was going. The morning after the party, I walked the halls of my mother's house as though I were moving through hostile territory. The silence pressed against me like body armor, heavy and suffocating. Each step echoed off marble floors polished so clean I could see my reflection staring back, a stranger in jeans and boots, out of place in a shrine to appearances. Every corner of that house held a memory, but none of those memories had been left intact. The gallery wall that once displayed family photos now showed only carefully curated images of my mother and brother at fundraisers, award ceremonies, and galas. Her smile radiated from gilded frames, Liam's face lit with easy charm. My own presence, my entire history, had been scrubbed away as though it were a stain. I paused where my cadet portrait used to hang. I could still see the outline on the wallpaper, faint and ghostly, like the shadow of someone executed and then erased. That photograph had been more than a picture. It had been proof. Proof that I had made it to West Point. Proof that all the late nights studying trigonometry at the kitchen table, all the push-ups in the mud of plebe summer had meant something. My mother never celebrated it, but I kept the image in my heart as a reminder that I had broken through barriers she never believed I could. Now even that reminder was gone. Still wandering around like you own the place? Liam's voice drifted down the staircase. He descended casually in silk pajamas, a phone in his hand. He looked like a man untouched by the world, as though responsibility were something invented for other people. I studied him as he reached the bottom step. The last time I had seen him, I was returning from Kandahar, shoulders heavy with dust and grief. He was picking out cufflinks for a dinner party. Nothing had changed. I grew up here too, I answered. My voice was calm, but my hands tightened into fists inside my pockets. He shrugged, already scrolling through his phone. Don't start with the martyr act, Claire. This is Mom's house. She's done more for this family than anyone. I almost laughed. More for the family? She had orchestrated every moment of last night like a general commanding a battlefield. Only her war was waged in cocktails and social status. She built empires out of appearances. But when her daughter returned from actual war zones, she treated her like a trespasser. I let the silence hang between us. Silence had always been my weapon in the military. It unsettled men who expected orders barked or explanations given. But in this house, silence had been twisted into exile. It was the tool my mother wielded best. I turned away from Liam and walked toward the dining room. The long mahogany table stretched like a runway, set with china that had never known a single chipped edge. I remembered sitting at that table as a teenager, clutching the envelope from West Point, heart pounding with the thrill of acceptance. My mother had opened it, glanced at the letter, and then let it flutter down like junk mail. "You'll ruin your life," she had said. "No decent man will marry a soldier." The words still stung decades later. Yet here I was, a decorated officer, respected by generals, trusted with lives, and still invisible in the very place that was supposed to be home. A sound caught my attention, a faint whisper of movement. I turned my head to see the wedding planner slipping through the room, clipboard in hand. She gave me a tight smile, polite but wary, as though I might spill red wine on the linens. I nodded back, then stepped outside onto the porch. The Virginia air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. Beyond the white columns, the manicured lawn stretched like an emerald carpet. It was beautiful in a sterile, suffocating way. Perfection that allowed no footprints, no scars. I stood there, breathing in the chill, and realized how foreign it all felt. I had lived in sandstorms that scoured skin raw. I had marched through valleys where every shadow could hide an enemy. Out there, the world was harsh but honest. Here it was polished to a shine so bright it blinded, hiding every cruelty beneath layers of silk and charm. That night I couldn't sleep. The guest room my mother had assigned me, Next to the storage closet was a cell lined with floral wallpaper and outdated furniture. The mattress sagged in the middle, swallowing me whole. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of erasure pressing down on my chest. I thought about my soldiers, about the bond we had forged in fire. No one cared where you came from or what pedigree you carried. What mattered was whether you could be counted on when the bullets started flying. Those men had seen me, truly seen me, in ways my own blood never had. As the hours stretched on, I replayed my father's voice in my memory, the one person who had recognized my worth. A true navigator doesn't look to the brightest stars, Claire. They look to the ones hidden, the steady lights you can trust when the night is darkest. The house had become a mausoleum of appearances, but the cemetery, Arlington, called to me. There, among the quiet rows of white headstones, was the only place I knew I still belonged. There I could speak to the man who had never erased me. Before dawn broke, I rose from the bed. I pulled on my jacket, laced my boots, and slipped out of the suffocating mansion without a sound. The driveway glistened with dew, my breath clouding in the cold. The engine of my car roared to life, a sound so loud it felt like freedom. I pointed the headlights toward the highway and left the house behind, the white columns shrinking in my rearview mirror. Ahead lay the mist-covered grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. Ahead lay the truth I had been searching for. And as I drove, one thought steadied me more than any medal, any rank. I may have been erased from their walls, but I will never be erased from the story that matters. By the time I returned from Arlington that afternoon, the mansion was already humming with the low murmur of influence. Cars with tinted windows lined the circular drive, and valets in crisp uniforms whisked away keys from Washington's elite. I sat in my Ford Explorer for a moment, watching them glide through the grand entrance, their laughter ringing out like chimes of a world I had never been invited into. Inside, the house had transformed. The chandeliers burned brighter than the sun, their light bouncing off crystal glasses filled with wine older than I was. The air carried the mingled scents of imported cigars, expensive perfume, and something sharper, ambition. Politicians in tailored suits, lobbyists with slick smiles, business titans whose hands had never known calluses, all mingled with effortless confidence. I moved quietly through the crowd, a ghost in jeans and boots. No one greeted me. Their eyes skimmed over me as though I were part of the catering staff. It should have angered me, but mostly it hollowed me out. I had led soldiers through ambushes, made decisions that meant life or death, and here in my own mother's house I was invisible. I tried small talk, reaching for neutral ground. A senator's wife asked where I had traveled recently. When I mentioned Kabul, her smile faltered, eyes darting as though I had mentioned a contagious disease. She excused herself within seconds. Another guest asked about my work. I said defense policy. He nodded politely, then pivoted to a conversation about golf. I was an anthropologist studying an alien tribe, fluent in none of their dialects. Then a leaner appeared. My mother was radiant in a floor-length gown of emerald silk, her pearls catching the light like a constellation. Her smile was dazzling, but I knew it for what it was, a weapon honed by years of wielding influence. She slid up beside me, her Chardonnay swirling in one hand, and with her free hand pressed something stiff and white into mine. An apron, again. "Claire, darling," she purred, her voice pitched just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You're not familiar with most of these people, I know. Why don't you help the staff with the hors d'oeuvres? You've always been so good at serving." The words detonated in the air. A few guests tittered politely, trying to mask their amusement behind sips of wine. Heat surged up my neck, burning my ears. For a split second, my chest tightened with the same helpless fury I'd felt under mortar fire, the feeling of being trapped, targeted, powerless. Across the room, Liam stood beside a congressman, a glass of whiskey in hand. He glanced toward us, caught the exchange, and shrugged. Just a flick of his shoulders, as though my humiliation were a minor inconvenience, nothing worth interrupting his conversation. Then he turned back, laughing at some anecdote about renovations to his architectural firm. That shrug cut deeper than any blade. I looked down at the apron in my hands. The fabric was starchy, spotless, meaningless. Yet in that moment it weighed more than body armor. I wanted to scream, to tell them all who I was, what I had done, the lives I had saved. But the words lodged in my throat like shrapnel. Before I could move, a woman with kind eyes approached me. She had the gentle look of someone unaccustomed to cruelty. "And what do you do, dear?" she asked warmly. I opened my mouth, but before the truth could escape, my mother's manicured hand landed on my arm, her voice bright and practiced. "Oh, she has some sort of administrative job with the government," Alina announced, her tone carrying just enough to reach the ears of the nearest circle. "Very stable. A bit dry, but it keeps her busy." Administrative. As though my years in combat zones, the blood on my boots, the medals pinned to my chest, amounted to filing paperwork. The laughter that rippled through the room was polite, controlled, but it sliced through me all the same. I nodded stiffly to the kind woman, excused myself, and walked away before my composure cracked. My steps carried me through the clinking glasses, the murmured deals, the false laughter, until I reached the kitchen. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unflattering. Stainless steel counters gleamed with surgical precision. A pile of lemon peels lay in the trash. I stood there, apron still in my hands, the fabric crumpled under my grip. Then slowly, deliberately, I dropped it into the garbage. The sound it made was soft, almost imperceptible. But to me it was thunder. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't anger. It was a silent vow, a declaration of war. As I leaned against the counter, the muffled hum of the party carried on in the distance, indifferent to my existence. I closed my eyes, inhaling the sterile scent of disinfectant and citrus. My chest rose and fell, steadying. They want to erase me, I thought. Then I will write my name where it cannot be erased. That night in the sterile quiet of the guest room by the storage closet, I replayed every moment. The smiles, the chuckles, the shrug, the apron in the trash. My hands trembled with fury, but my heart burned with something sharper than rage, resolve. I knew where I needed to go. I knew whose voice I needed to hear again. The house of polished lies had spoken. Now it was time to seek the truth among the silent stones of Arlington. Dawn came in silence. A thin mist curled across the suburban streets of Virginia as I steered my Ford Explorer away from the house that had once been mine, but now felt like enemy territory. The roads were empty, lined with maples shedding their final bursts of crimson and gold. Each turn took me farther from marble floors and crystal chandeliers, closer to the only place where my soul could still breathe. Arlington National Cemetery. When I arrived, the world was hushed, as if the earth itself had paused to honor the thousands who slept beneath its soil. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and damp earth. Rows of white marble headstones stretched in every direction, perfectly aligned like soldiers in eternal formation. I walked slowly, my boots pressing into the dew-soaked grass. The silence here was different from the silence of my mother's house. Her silence was a blade, meant to cut and erase. This silence was sacred, a blanket of reverence that held the weight of sacrifice. I found his marker easily. Colonel James Morgan, United States Army, my father. The grass around his stone was trimmed with military precision, as though even nature bowed to his memory. I stood there, breath clouding in the cold air, and for the first time in years let my guard slip. "Dad," I whispered, my voice catching. "Why does she hate me for being what you were?" The words fell into the mist and dissolved. But in my heart, I could hear his voice again, rumbling low and steady, the way it had on nights when I was a girl sitting with him on the back porch. The sky above us had been a dark canvas spattered with stars. He would trace the constellations with a calloused finger, teaching me to navigate by lights too faint for most people to notice. "Your mother loves the brightest stars, Claire," he had told me. "She loves things that shine, that glitter, that announce themselves. But a true soldier, a true navigator trusts the dim stars, the ones steady and constant. They'll guide you when you're lost in the dark. Be that dim star, honey, quiet, reliable, never wavering." At the time I hadn't understood. I wanted to be bright, celebrated, undeniable. Now, standing before his grave, I understood perfectly. My mother's world worshipped glitter, but my father's world, my world, was built on constancy. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. I saw again the night I received my West Point acceptance letter. I had been trembling with joy, convinced that this was the moment my mother would finally be proud. She wasn't. She had dismissed it as a mistake, a death sentence for femininity and social standing. But my father had seen me. He'd slipped me out of the house that evening, away from the lavish party my mother was throwing for Liam's art ribbon, and taken me into D.C. We ate chili dogs at a crowded diner, grease dripping down our fingers, laughter bubbling up like freedom. "Don't let anyone tell you your dreams aren't worth celebrating," he'd said, his eyes shining with pride my mother never showed. Now, years later, the memory still warmed me, even as grief burned in my chest. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a challenge coin from my old unit. It was smooth and cool, heavy with meaning. Soldiers leave them on the graves of comrades to honor their memory, a silent salute etched in metal. Kneeling, I placed it gently on the marble stone. The soft click rang louder in my heart than any applause. "I'm not lost, Dad," I whispered, my hand resting against the cold stone. "I'm just in the dark right now, but I remember your lesson. I'll be the dim star. I'll find my way." For a long moment I just stood there, letting the silence wrap around me. Then, as the mist began to burn off and the first rays of sunlight pierced the trees, something shifted inside me. It wasn't fiery anger. It was colder, sharper, resolve. I squared my shoulders, inhaled the crisp morning air, and turned away from the grave. Walking back through the endless rows of white, I thought of the soldiers I had led, the battles we had fought, the lives lost under my command. Each stone I passed was another reminder that my story wasn't written in the language of silk dresses and charity galas. It was written in sweat, mud, and blood. My mother could try to erase me from her walls, but she could never erase me from this ground, from this history, from the line of service that stretched back through generations. By the time I reached my car, the sun was breaking through fully, glinting off the marble stones like 1,000 quiet beacons. Dim stars, all of them guiding me forward. As I slid behind the wheel, I felt the faintest trace of a smile tug at my lips. The battlefield ahead wasn't in Helmand or Kandahar. It was here, in the manicured suburbs of Virginia. But the rules were the same. Know your enemy, gather intelligence, strike with precision. And this time, I wouldn't be fighting alone. The day after my visit to Arlington, I sat in a quiet corner of a Starbucks, staring into the black surface of my coffee as though it held answers. The cafe was filled with the soft buzz of laptops, the hiss of espresso machines, the chatter of students and professionals. Ordinary life. A world that had never known sandstorms, night raids, or folded flags handed to grieving mothers. On my screen glowed an email from the Pentagon, a commendation for an intelligence brief I had authored, one that had influenced national policy. The words were sterile, official, yet weighty. Proof that my work mattered, that my career was more than administrative. I let out a bitter laugh. The world saw me, recognized me, valued me, but my own family saw only a nuisance in need of an apron. That's when another email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simple: coffee. The sender, Ava Russo. I froze. Ava, my brother Liam's fiancée. I had met her once in passing, a polite handshake at some holiday dinner years ago. Liam had introduced her as a rising star in public relations, someone with poise and ambition that matched my mother's taste. I remembered her as pretty, polite, forgettable. But the email was short, direct. Meet me at DuPont Circle, tomorrow. 10 a.m., no explanation. No pleasantries. My instincts stirred. In the Army, vague messages meant reconnaissance, not small talk. I typed a simple reply, "I'll be there." The next morning I found the cafe tucked away on a side street, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. A world away from the sterile perfection of my mother's house. Ava was already there. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, no designer labels in sight. She looked different, stripped of the polished veneer. Yet she carried herself with a posture I recognized immediately. Shoulders straight, eyes scanning the room, a stillness born not of etiquette but of training. She stood as I approached. "Colonel," she said quietly. My pulse skipped. "Captain," I answered before I even thought about it. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. She didn't waste time. "Ma'am, I know what's happening with Alina." She said my mother's name with a clinical detachment that startled me. "She's always been like this, but I need you to understand I'm not part of it." I studied her face. She wasn't nervous, She wasn't rehearsed, she was steady. She leaned forward, her voice low, urgent. Last year, after Liam started boasting about his family's influence, I ran a background check, a professional verification. That's when I discovered who you are. I know your record. I know what you've done. My muscles tightened, instinctively bracing. And what exactly do you think I've done? Her gaze didn't waver. You saved my life. The words hit like a rifle crack. Kandahar, Arghandab Valley. Operation Desert Aegis. She continued. My unit was ambushed. We were pinned down, no way out, and then your team came. You led the counter-assault yourself, pulled us out. I remember your voice over the radio, calm and steady like a lighthouse in chaos. I never forgot it. Images surged in my mind, dust clouds, tracer fire slicing the night, the roar of RPGs, faces blurred by adrenaline. Soldiers I carried out, others I couldn't. To me, it had been another mission, one of countless firefights etched into memory. But to her, it was the day she lived. I looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time I didn't see Liam's fiancé. I saw a soldier, a survivor. Her voice trembled just slightly as she said, I owe you everything. In whatever battlefield you're on now, I'm your soldier. I don't care if it's family politics or full-scale war, you are not alone. A warmth spread through my chest, unexpected and almost unbearable. I hadn't realized how starved I was for loyalty outside the uniform. For years, I had fought battles alone, carrying scars no one at home understood. And here across a small cafe table was proof that my service hadn't disappeared into the void. Someone remembered, someone cared. I swallowed hard. Thank you, Captain. Her expression softened, but her tone remained all business. There's someone you need to meet. Someone who knows your mother better than anyone. A retired DIA strategist. Her name's Dr. Maya Singh. She's not a therapist, she's a war planner. And she believes a leaner isn't just cruel, she's running a campaign. A campaign, the word hung in the air like smoke. Ava slid a folded slip of paper across the table, an address in Alexandria. Maya can help. She has resources, contacts, a mind for strategy. You can't fight a leaner with emotion. You have to fight her with precision. That's what Maya does. I picked up the paper, my fingers steady. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't luck. This was a turning point. I met Ava's eyes again. You're risking a lot. Her answer came without hesitation. You saved my life once. Now I'm returning the favor. For the first time in years, I felt the foxhole close around me again. But this time, I wasn't the only one inside. That night, back in the dim quiet of my temporary apartment, I stared at the slip of paper on my table. Dr. Maya Singh. My mother thought she was untouchable, her lies invincible, her silence absolute. But now I had allies. A captain whose loyalty was forged in fire. And perhaps a strategist who knew how to dismantle empires built on illusion. For the first time since stepping into that mansion, I didn't feel erased. I felt mobilized. The war had begun. The brownstone in Alexandria didn't look like a war room. From the street, it was quiet, discreet, the kind of building you might pass 100 times without noticing. No brass plaque, no sign of what was inside. Just a narrow door painted deep red, flanked by ivy-climbing brick walls. I hesitated for a moment on the front step, the paper Ava had given me folded in my pocket. Part of me wondered if this was reckless. My entire career had been built on reading terrain, anticipating ambushes, trusting my instincts. And my instincts told me this meeting wasn't social. It was tactical. I rang the bell. The door opened to reveal a tall woman with streaks of silver in her black hair, her eyes sharp behind frameless glasses. She wore a simple charcoal suit, but she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had briefed presidents and outmaneuvered generals. Colonel Morgan, she said, her voice warm but businesslike. Ava called ahead, please come in. I stepped into a space that felt nothing like an office. Maps of global hotspots covered one wall, pushbins and notes clustered like constellations of conflict. A massive whiteboard stood covered in diagrams, arrows, and timelines. A row of bookshelves overflowed with binders labeled with acronyms only insiders would recognize. CENTCOM, SOCOM, HUMINT, SIGINT. This wasn't therapy. This was operations. Dr. Maya Singh, she introduced herself, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, unflinching. I used to run strategy for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Retired, at least on paper. I nodded. You don't seem very retired. She smiled faintly. Once you've spent decades seeing how power is actually wielded, you don't just stop. She gestured to a leather chair at the table. Sit, let's not waste time. I sat, my back straight, my eyes scanning the room the way I had scanned command tents in Kandahar. Maya poured tea into 2 cups, her movements measured, deliberate. I've known Alina Morgan for 30 years, she began. Committees, boards, charity galas, I've watched her operate. And I want you to understand something clearly. This isn't a family squabble. What she's doing to you is a campaign of information warfare. The words rang with clarity, like a briefing before deployment. Your mother has spent decades mastering the weapons of perception, reputation, narrative, silence. She isolates you, erases you from photographs, diminishes your service, feeds the right lies to the right ears. It's not clumsiness, it's deliberate. She's controlling the battle space, memory, image, legacy. I felt my jaw tighten. So what do? Maya's eyes met mine, steady as stone. We fight back the same way, with truth, documented, irrefutable truth. You don't charge her battlefield with emotion. You dismantle her position piece by piece, fact by fact. She slid open a drawer and placed 2 items on the polished table between us. A sleek black USB drive and a digital voice recorder no bigger than a tube of lipstick. From now on, you gather intelligence. Record every conversation, every attempt at manipulation. Photograph every document she slides across a table. Store it here. She tapped the USB, encrypted. We build a case, not just in court, but in the court of public perception. I picked up the recorder, turning it over in my hand. It was small, almost delicate, yet it felt heavier than a rifle. Maya leaned forward. The key to defeating Alina isn't to shout louder. It's to show the world who she really is in her own words, her own handwriting. Precision, timing, that's how you win. Her words brought back memories of briefing rooms in Afghanistan, where maps were spread across tables, markers drawing lines of ingress and egress, arrows noting enemy positions. This wasn't so different. Only now the enemy wore silk gowns and pearls instead of tactical vests. A knock on the door interrupted us. Ava stepped in, dressed in civilian clothes, but her stance was unmistakably military. She carried a laptop under one arm and a folder under the other. Captain Russo reporting, she said lightly, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt since leaving the army, belonging. The 3 of us gathered around the table. Meyer outlined the plan with the precision of a general. Ava would leverage her access, floor plans, guest lists, schedules. Maya would coordinate timing, identify pressure points, journalists, influencers, power brokers. My role was command, providing ground truth, building the psychological profile of my mother, and ultimately deciding when and where to strike. We weren't family by blood, we were a unit. As the night deepened, the maps on the wall seemed to blur with the outlines of a different battlefield. My mother's mansion, the Four Seasons ballroom, the carefully curated social stage she thought she controlled. But this time she wouldn't be the only one directing the performance. When the meeting broke up, I slipped the recorder into my clutch. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened window, haunted, tired, but steadier than I had been in years. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving humiliation. I was preparing to counterattack. Walking out into the cold Alexandria night, I felt the weight of my father's words settle on me once more. Be the dim star, Claire, quiet, constant, unwavering. Now I thought maybe it was time for the dim star to chart a new constellation, one that would burn bright enough to expose every lie. The invitation arrived in the most unexpected way. My phone buzzed late in the afternoon, and when I saw my mother's name flash on the screen, my chest tightened. For a moment I considered letting it ring, but instinct told me to answer. Her voice was unusually warm, almost syrupy. Claire, darling, before the wedding chaos takes over, I'd love a quiet dinner with you. Just the 2 of us, no distractions. What do you say? The tone was wrong. My mother didn't do reconciliation. She did maneuvers. The hair on the back of my neck rose, but Maya's words echoed in my head. Gather intelligence. Record everything. Don't go in as a daughter. Go in as an operative. I'd like that, I answered evenly. Before leaving my apartment that evening, I slipped the lipstick-sized recorder into my clutch. The tiny green light blinked once, then went dark. I was no longer just a woman going to dinner with her mother. I was a soldier heading into hostile territory. The restaurant she chose was the Inn at Little Washington, 3 Michelin stars, whispered conversations, candlelight reflected off crystal stemware. It was a place where senators proposed bills between courses and CEOs negotiated mergers over champagne. Every detail was curated to make one thing certain: no scene could possibly be made here. She was already seated when I arrived, impeccable in a black silk dress and a single strand of pearls. She rose to kiss my cheek, her smile dazzling, her perfume sharp as a blade. "You look lovely, dear," she said, her eyes flicking over my simple black dress, assessing and dismissing it in the same glance. The meal unfolded like theater. Tiny, exquisite sculptures arrived on porcelain plates: carpaccio of lamb with Caesar salad ice cream, scallops glazed with truffle vinaigrette. Each dish was a performance, but I barely tasted any of it. My mother talked about family, about unity, about how proud she was of me. Lies polished until they gleamed. I nodded, smiled faintly, answered in monosyllables. The recorder was capturing every word. Then came dessert, a towering 7-layer coconut cake, a showpiece designed to distract. With the flourish of a stage magician, my mother reached into her handbag and drew out a neat folder of papers. She slid it across the linen tablecloth, nestling it beside my plate as though it were nothing more than an after-dinner mint. "Just a small matter of paperwork," she said lightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "To consolidate family assets. It'll make things so much easier to manage. And it will help Liam tremendously with his business ventures. All you have to do is sign right here." My heart thudded. I opened the folder. The pages were dense with legal jargon, but certain phrases leapt out. Relinquish all claims, transfer of title irrevocable, unconditional waiver. This wasn't consolidation. This was erasure. She wanted me to sign away my inheritance, my father's house, the one place that still tied me to him. I looked up slowly, meeting her eyes. Her smile was dazzling, confident, practiced. She thought she had me cornered. "I think I'll need my lawyer to review this first," I said calmly, pushing the folder back across the table. The transformation was immediate. Her smile froze, then cracked. Her eyes, once feigning warmth, hardened into chips of ice. Her voice dropped, venomous and sharp. "A lawyer?" she hissed, leaning forward. "We are family, Claire. Don't you trust your own mother?" It was the classic tactic, guilt wrapped in affection, an order disguised as love. I kept my expression neutral. "It's standard procedure. I'll have it sent back once my lawyer reviews it." Her hand shot out, pressing the folder down as though sheer force could make me take it. "Don't be difficult, just sign it." For the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of shame. I didn't feel like a child scolded at the dinner table. I felt clarity, cold, hard soldier's clarity. I slid $100 bill onto the linen, enough to cover my share. "I'll be in touch," I said evenly, standing. I turned and walked out, heels clicking on the polished floor, the murmurs of other diners fading behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel her fury burning into my... Her mask shattered, her weapon blunted. Back in my apartment, I laid the papers flat on the coffee table and began photographing every page. Then I uploaded the audio file from the recorder into the encrypted drive Maya had set up. A digital war chest, piece by piece. Minutes later, my phone rang. Maya's voice came through, calm but edged with steel. "Haley, I had my legal contact review the photos. This isn't consolidation. It's a complete waiver of your rights. Ironclad, she tried to steal your father's legacy from you tonight." I exhaled slowly, nausea rolling through me. Hearing it confirmed in legal terms was worse than reading the words myself. But the recorder was running. The documents were scanned. The case was building. This was no longer about humiliation at a party or being erased from a photo wall. This was war. And now I finally had my first piece of ammunition. 2 days after that dinner, I thought the worst was behind me. I had photographs of the legal trap, a recording of my mother's syrupy manipulation, and Maya had assured me, "This is enough to begin a case." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had traction. Like maybe the ground beneath me wasn't going to give way again. I was wrong. The ambush came not in person, but through pixels. I was sitting in the quiet of my apartment, sipping stale coffee and scrolling headlines when Ava's text came through. "Check this, now." She included a link. I tapped it. The screen filled with a Virginia Society blog, one of those gossipy, sanctimonious outlets that chronicled charity balls and whispered scandals among DC's elite. The headline screamed in bold font, "The Morgan family and their prodigal daughter a sad tale." My stomach dropped. The article painted me as a reclusive, bitter woman who had abandoned her family to chase a vague government job. It claimed I was unstable, resentful of Liam's success, desperate to sabotage his upcoming wedding. The tone was smug, pitying, venomous, and then I saw the photo. It was me, taken years ago after a 72-hour mission in Kandahar. My face was caked with dirt, my eyes hollow with exhaustion, my uniform streaked with sweat and dust. I remembered the moment vividly. We had just pulled through an ambush and I'd lost a soldier under my command. Someone must have snapped the photo in passing. To me, it was a scar of memory. To them, it was evidence. The caption read, "Unstable veteran struggles with reintegration." I felt the air leave my lungs. My throat closed. They hadn't just twisted my service, they weaponized it. They took the image of my sacrifice, the face of my grief, and used it as proof of madness. My hands trembled so badly I dropped the phone onto the couch. For a long moment, I just sat there in the dark, the city lights flickering outside like indifferent stars. The walls pressed in, the silence roaring. I had fought insurgents, stared down death, carried bloodied men in my arms. Yet this, a blog post, a single photo, pierced deeper than bullets, because it wasn't the enemy firing at me. It was my own family. Tears blurred my vision, hot and humiliating. The urge to disappear surged inside me. To shut down the laptop, turn off the phone, let the smear bury me alive. My mother wanted me erased, and she had just come close to finishing the job. But then, like a flare in the darkness, I remembered my father's voice. The dim stars, Claire, the ones you have to search for, the ones that guide you when the night is darkest. And then Maya's calm directive, fight with precision, not emotion. And Ava's conviction, her hand steady on the table when she told me, "You saved my life, now I'm your soldier." I wasn't alone. I grabbed the phone again, my hand steadier now. My breath slowed like before a mission briefing. I opened my laptop, typed "Brené Brown man in the arena" into the search bar, and pulled up her lecture quoting Roosevelt's famous words. "It is not the critic who counts, the credit belongs to the one who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood." Dust, sweat, blood, that was my face in that photo. Not madness, proof that I had been in the arena while others sipped wine in safety. I let the words wash over me, pushing the shame aside. Slowly, clarity returned. The smear was not my end, it was my enemy's opening salvo. And if Alina thought she could win by striking first, she had underestimated me. I closed my laptop with a snap. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened screen, not the ghost my family tried to erase, not the broken woman the blog described. A soldier, a commander. I picked up my phone, dialed Maya. She answered on the first ring. "Activate everything," I said. My voice low, stripped of fear. "It's time to fight back." Maya's brownstone no longer felt like an office. By the time I arrived that evening, it had been transformed into a command post. The lights were dim, the air thick with the smell of dry erase markers and strong coffee. Maps and timelines sprawled across the walls. Laptops hummed on the table, their screens glowing with spreadsheets and encrypted chat threads. Ava was already there, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled, posture sharp. She wasn't Liam's fiancée anymore. She was Captain Russo again, steady and alert. Maya stood by the whiteboard, marker in hand, her eyes scanning a list of names like a general studying troop positions. I shut the door behind me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of a unit forming around me. Not blood, but bond. "Sit," Maya said, her tone was clipped, purposeful. "We don't have time to waste." Alina escalated. That smear piece was coordinated, seeded to sympathetic outlets. "She's running an active information campaign against you. If you do nothing, she wins. If you counter, you must do it with precision." I lowered myself into the chair, hands folded, the old calm of a briefing settling over me. "What's our objective?" Maya turned to the board and underlined 3 words: truth, timing, terrain. "First," she said, "we collect irrefutable evidence, documents, recordings, eyewitness accounts. Alina's strength is perception. We turn her strength into a vulnerability by proving she lies." She tapped the second word: Timing, we don't release this piecemeal. We wait for the moment when it will inflict maximum damage, and there's only one stage large enough to expose her. Ava finished the thought, the wedding. The word hung in the room like the thud of a gavel. Maya nodded. 300 guests, politicians, journalists, donors, influencers. Her curated kingdom gathered in one ballroom. If we wait until then, every eye will see the truth at the same time. There will be no putting the mask back on. I exhaled slowly. Then we make the wedding a battlefield. Ava set her laptop on the table, pulling up floor plans of the Four Seasons ballroom. Red lines traced exits and entrances. Yellow dots marked cameras and blind spots. I can get access to the AV system, she said matter-of-factly. I know the contractor running sound and projection. If we prepare the files, video, documents, testimony, we can control what hits the screens. At the right moment, everything Alina has tried to bury will explode in front of her guests. Her voice was calm, steady. This wasn't revenge, it was operations planning. Maya began listing names of journalists who would be in attendance, 3 in particular with reputations for breaking scandals wide open. If they receive a secure dossier at the same moment the truth goes public, she explained, Alina can't spin it. The narrative is already out of her hands. I listened, my chest tightening with something that felt like electricity. It had been years since I'd sat in a war room like this, watching a plan take shape, each person falling into their role. Maya, strategist, Ava, intelligence and logistics. Me, command, and my role was clear. You'll have every piece of ground truth you need, I said. Dates, patterns of her manipulation, every attempt to erase me, and the psychological profile, how she reacts under pressure. She'll crack, I've seen it. Maya's eyes flicked up to meet mine. Then we prepare the strike. The hours blurred. Ava outlined the wedding timeline, the ceremony, the toasts, the reception. We circled moments of opportunity. Maya assigned tasks with surgical precision. Ava securing access codes, me gathering visual evidence of my service record. Maya leveraging contacts to get confirmation videos from senior officers. On the whiteboard, the plan began to look less like scribbles and more like an operation order. Phase 1, Intel, gather and secure every recording, document, and image. Phase 2, Deployment, coordinate timing with journalists and AV control. Phase 3, Execution, public reveal at the wedding. Immediate press coverage. Alina's empire dismantled in real time. At some point, I realized I was smiling. Not the bitter, ironic smile I'd worn in Starbucks days earlier, but the steady, grim smile of a soldier who finally has a mission. This feels different, I admitted. For so long, I've been fighting alone. But this, I looked from Maya to Ava. This feels like a unit again. Ava's eyes softened. That's because it is. By the time we wrapped for the night, the city outside was silent. I walked out into the cool Alexandria air, the slip of paper with my tasks in my pocket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased or silenced. I felt mobilized. I remembered my father's words about dim stars, steady, constant guides in the dark. Tonight, I realized dim stars weren't solitary. They were constellations, each light connecting with another, forming patterns that could guide whole armies through the night. I wasn't alone anymore. A new constellation was forming. And together, we were going to burn Alina's empire to the ground. The night before the wedding, sleep was a stranger. I sat alone in my apartment, city lights bleeding through half-closed blinds, the silence thick as fog. The plan was set, the evidence ready, allies in position. But in this final stretch, there was only ritual. I unzipped the garment bag hanging in my closet. Inside lay my Class A Army service uniform, the dress blues reserved for ceremonies, funerals, and moments when the weight of service had to be worn on one's shoulders for the world to see. I laid the jacket out on the desk under the harsh white glow of the lamp. Slowly, methodically, I began to prepare it. The silver star came first, its surface catching the light like a shard of history. I pinned it to the left side of my chest. Beside it, the purple heart, earned when shrapnel tore through my shoulder outside a village in Helmand. Next, the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star. Each ribbon, each medal, a chapter written not in ink but in blood, sweat, and bone-deep sacrifice. As I worked, memories rose like ghosts. The soldier from Ohio who kept a photo of his sweetheart in his helmet. The Christmas Eve rocket attack that interrupted my video call home. The ambush in Arghandab Valley where Ava's unit nearly didn't make it out. Each decoration wasn't just mine, it belonged to them, to the men and women whose faces still haunted my dreams. The jacket grew heavier with every pin, every clasp. By the time I finished, it was no longer a uniform, it was armor. I steamed each crease until it was razor sharp. The brass buttons gleamed under the lamplight, polished until they reflected my face, older, lined with fatigue but unbroken. When I slid the jacket onto its hanger and stepped back, it stood like an effigy, a sentinel, a reminder that I was more than the daughter erased from photographs, more than the woman mocked with an apron. I was a soldier, and tomorrow I would walk into battle once again. At 0300 hours, my phone buzzed with a secure message. It was from General Alistair Vance, my old commanding officer. Attached were 2 files, the unredacted after-action report for Operation Desert Aegis, and a video statement filmed in his office at the Pentagon. His gravel and steel voice confirmed my rank, my commendations, and my actions on the day Ava nearly died. No hesitation, no equivocation. A soldier's word. I played it once, the sight of him in full uniform, the flags behind him, his gaze steady into the camera. The weight of it filled me with a quiet strength. My mother's lies would collapse under the truth of that voice. By dawn, I was still awake. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the table, and watched the sun rise over the Potomac. The light burned through the haze, painting the river gold. I thought of my father again, of the nights we had traced constellations on the back porch. Be the dim star, Claire, steady, constant, unwavering. I touched the edge of the jacket on the hanger, the metals gleaming softly in the new light. My father had taught me that dim stars guide you through the darkness. But maybe he'd underestimated me. Maybe dim stars could also burn bright when they needed to, bright enough to expose every lie, to set fire to every illusion. Later that morning, Ava arrived with a duffel bag and the calm efficiency of a soldier reporting for duty. She checked the AV files on her laptop, tested secure drives, walked me through timing one last time. Maya called in over speakerphone, her voice precise, commanding. Phase 1 is complete, Phase 2 is set. The moment the ceremony transitions to the reception, we deploy. Claire, you walk in on your own terms, not as their daughter, as who you are. I glanced at the uniform. Armor on, I said. Armor on, Ava echoed. That evening, as the city descended into the glittering chaos of wedding parties and gala dinners, I stood before the mirror in my apartment. The jacket hugged my shoulders, the 2 silver stars gleamed on each epaulette, the metals lined in perfect rows. My reflection stared back, stern, steady, a soldier reporting for duty. I slipped on white gloves, adjusted the collar, checked every line, every seam. Then I placed my cap under my arm and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons, my mother would be at the height of her power. She would be radiant, untouchable, the matriarch presiding over her perfect world. But tomorrow I would walk into that ballroom in armor. Not to ask for recognition, not to beg for love, but to bring the truth crashing down like artillery fire. The reckoning was no longer coming, it was here. The Four Seasons ballroom glittered like a cathedral of power. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, violins hummed in polished harmony, and rows of pastel silks and tailored tuxedos filled the seats. Every guest was a piece on Eleanor Morgan's chessboard. Politicians, journalists, lobbyists, donors, all gathered under her careful choreography. At the front, Liam stood tall in his tuxedo, his hair perfect, his smile effortless. Eleanor sat in the first row, regal in champagne silk. Her pearls glowing under the light, she radiated calm as if the night were hers to command. The minister's voice rose above the gentle music, welcoming the 300 guests. Then the oak doors at the back of the room swung open. I stepped inside. A hush fell like a curtain. The violins faltered, a single note dying in the air. Heads turned, whispers caught in throats. I wasn't in a gown. I was in my dress blues, every metal polished to a burnished gleam, every crease sharp enough to cut glass. The 2 silver stars on my shoulders caught the chandelier light and held it, unblinking. I walked the aisle with a calm, measured pace. My eyes didn't search for my mother's face, but I felt her stare the way a soldier feels a sniper's scope. I reached the last row and sat, hands folded in white gloves, a silent sentinel in the back of her perfect ceremony. The minister stammered, then pushed on. Vows were spoken. Rings exchanged. But the air was different now, thick with questions, tension, unease. When he reached the words, "If anyone has any objection to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace," the silence was electric. No one moved, but everyone looked at me. I didn't rise, I didn't need to, because Ava did. The bride stepped forward in her gown, luminous and steady. She turned not to Liam, not to the crowd, but to me. Then she raised her hand to her brow and delivered a sharp, perfect military salute. To Major General Claire Morgan, she declared, her voice ringing through the microphone. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. My mother's face cracked, her practiced smile collapsing into something pale and twisted. Liam's jaw slackened, disbelief breaking through his composure. But Ava wasn't done. She saved my life and the lives of 5 soldiers during Operation Desert Aegis in Kandahar. You sit here tonight sipping champagne because she fought in the dust and blood, and you have erased her. Not anymore. At that exact moment, the monogram of Liam and Ava's initials projected behind the altar flickered. The screens came alive with files. The unredacted after-action report, my name and rank clear, mission details undeniable. Then photos, me in the field, me with my unit, me receiving the Silver Star. Finally, the video. General Vance filled the screen, his voice gravel and steel. This is to certify that Major General Claire Morgan served with distinction. Her valor under fire saved lives and altered the course of Operation Desert Aegis. Her record is unimpeachable. Phones buzzed across the ballroom as Maya's encrypted dossier hit journalists' inboxes. Screens lit up, reporters' eyes widened. The smear blog that had mocked me was already being dismantled in real time by the truth flooding their hands. Eleanor shot to her feet, her voice raw, stripped of polish. "Stop this. Lies, all of it." But the room wasn't listening. The applause began with a single pair of hands, then another. Then a wave, rolling, thunderous, shaking the crystal chandeliers. Guests stood, clapping not for the bride or groom, but for me. For the soldier they had just seen, undeniable, unerasable. I sat motionless, back straight, hands folded. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply let the ovation wash over me like a tide I had waited a lifetime to feel. Eleanor shrieked something I couldn't hear over the roar. She lunged toward the stage, desperate, unraveling. But it didn't matter. The empire she had built on lies and curated perfection had collapsed in a single evening, brought down not by scandal or gossip, but by truth. When the clapping finally ebbed, the air was different, charged, irreversible. Nothing could go back to the way it was. I rose quietly, smoothed my jacket, and walked out. My heels clicked on marble, each step steady. I didn't look back at the wreckage of her perfect wedding. I didn't need to. The battle was over. The truth had spoken. The morning after the wedding, the city woke to headlines that could not be ignored. The invisible General Pentagon confirms heroism of officer hidden by own family. My face was on the front page of the Washington Post, not the hollow-eyed smear photo, but the image of me in uniform, medals gleaming, shoulders squared. News anchors debated the story on every network. Social media lit up with hashtags. Strangers demanding to know how a decorated officer could be erased by her own blood. By noon, Eleanor's empire of influence was rubble. The charity board she chaired quietly requested her resignation. Invitations to galas vanished. Her phone, once a hive of power, went silent. The friends who toasted her with champagne no longer answered her calls. And the wedding, officially canceled. Ava had left her engagement ring on the hotel suite table, walking out with the same steady composure she had carried in combat. She was free, and she had made her choice clear: loyalty to truth, not to illusion. 2 days later, Liam appeared at my apartment door. His perfect hair was disheveled, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked less like a man wronged and more like a boy who had lost his safety net. "You ruined everything," he whispered hoarsely. "Did you have to do it like that?" I studied him for a long moment. This was the brother I had once shielded on playgrounds, the boy I had once tried to love past our mother's poison. But now I saw him clearly, not a victim, but a willing accomplice. "No, Liam," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. I didn't ruin anything. I just turned on the lights. Mom's lies and your silence did the rest. His mouth opened, closed. No words came. I closed the door softly. The lock clicked, a quiet, final sound. There was still one piece of unfinished business. The house. My father's house. The mansion Alina had claimed as her throne. My lawyer, recommended by Maya, drafted the documents. It wasn't an eviction, that would have been vengeance, and vengeance wasn't my mission. Instead, effective immediately, Alina was required to pay market-rate rent on the property. And every cent of that rent would go directly into a trust I had established. The Colonel James Morgan Legacy Fund, dedicated to scholarships for the children of fallen service members. The house would no longer be a monument to her vanity. It would be a resource for those who carried the true weight of sacrifice. She could keep living there, surrounded by chandeliers and portraits. But every month, a reminder would leave her account, a tribute to the values she had spent her life despising. A gilded cage, justice, not revenge. Weeks passed, the noise faded. The headlines gave way to new scandals, new crises. My name slipped from the trending lists, but peace doesn't come from applause, it comes from alignment. For the first time, I felt that alignment settling into my bones. Then came the invitation. West Point, the academy. They wanted me to deliver the keynote address at graduation. Standing on that historic podium, looking out over rows of cadets in gray uniforms, I thought of my father. This was the stage he had dreamed of for me, the proof that his dim star had found its course. I didn't speak about combat tactics or policy briefs. I spoke about the battlefields no one warns you about. We train you here for war. I told them, my voice steady. But sometimes the hardest arena is not abroad. Sometimes it is in your own home. The courage to stand against silence, against those who would erase you, that is just as vital as courage under fire. Honor is not just a word sewn onto flags. It is a boundary you draw to protect your soul. The cadets listened, faces young, eager, untested. I gave them the map I had once longed for. Later, back in my apartment, I opened an email from a foundation I had quietly funded for years. It contained a video message. A girl appeared on screen, maybe 19, standing in a dorm room with a university banner behind her. Her voice was shy but steady. My name is Sarah. My dad was Sergeant David Jensen. He was killed in Iraq. I'm here because of the scholarship you gave me. I just wanted to say thank you for believing in me when no one else did. The screen went black. I sat there, tears slipping silently down my face. Not of sorrow, not of anger, but of fulfillment. That girl's voice mattered more than headlines, more than applause, more than Alina's downfall. This was legacy. That night I wrote the first words of my story. They say home is where the heart is, but sometimes you have to leave home to find your heart again. I wasn't writing for fame. I wasn't writing for vindication. I was writing for every soldier who ever felt invisible, every child erased from their family's walls, every dim star trying to guide themselves through the dark. Because my father was right, dim stars endure. And sometimes when the night is darkest, they shine bright enough to guide others home. That's my story, a journey through silence, betrayal, and finally truth. If it resonated with you, thank you for listening all the way through. Your support means more than you know. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, share this story with someone who needs it, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to be here when the next story goes live, tap the notification bell. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and never forget, even the dimmest star can guide you home.